All right, welcome back. We are COMP397 in the winter 2020 semester at Centennial, and we're week 4, part 2 of our broadcast. We're going to start creating a new game object. And what does that mean for us? We prepared, in the last video, we prepared this vector object, which is a vector 2. We kind of did this. I want to mention that there are other resources out there if you want to make your own classes. They've opened up Unity from a source code perspective. You can look at the Unity source code yourself, which is kind of what I did in preparation for this class. So if you actually search online and you say something like Unity decompiled, then you can actually look at the Unity source code a little bit. So if I take a look at the Unity engine source code under Unity engine, I can scroll down to a vector 2, and you can see that you can take a look at this stuff. This is the other GitHub repo. There's other ones. There's actually the official. This is the unofficial Unity engine stuff, but you can find all of the vector 2 stuff and every other method out there that's part of Unity here. All right, if you really want to, which I find interesting. I find interesting looking at other people's code and taking a look at what they're doing compared to what we're doing. And then how can we use that to make our games as well? And I got to thank Unity for doing that. Okay, so that's something that I did in prep for this class. All right, so what we did was we established this new vector 2 object, and what I want to do now is, we also tested it. We did kind of went back into our game.ts file, and we tested it here, a vector 1. We made this vector, and we can write it out to string. I want to clean up our file now, so I want to kind of go through and get rid of some of these buttons. I have my reset button and my click me button. I want to kind of get rid of all these buttons for a second. Let's just use one button, the click me button. And I want to do a couple new things. Also, the goodbye label, let's get rid of that. No more goodbye label. The background, I don't want to have that anymore. No more background. And I don't want to rotate anything or even check bounds. I don't want to do those things. I want to clean up my code a little bit because I want to get ready for next week for you guys. Let's get rid of this check bounds function as well. Again, just cleaning things up, right? At the top, I have goodbye label, my reset button, my background. Let's get rid of all these references, just so that way I can be ready for what I'm doing. So, hello label. I don't want my hello label to say hello anymore. I want it to say whatever the name of the game is going to be. All right. So let's just call this the welcome label. So right click and I'll rename it to welcome label. And I'm also going to change the click me button to the start button. So I'm going to change the click me button, rename it to start button. Okay. I have a couple of buttons that I've made and I put up on eCentennial for you guys. So if you actually go up on eCentennial, you can see that there's a couple things. I've got a placeholder image, start button, those two things. Can you grab those two things, please, and download them? So the placeholder image, it kind of looks like one day. This is what the placeholder image looks like. Right, we're going to use that for our game object. So you can simply just download this. So download. And I'm going to put the placeholder image inside of my my project. So I have a 3C. I'm going to go to assets. I'm going to go to images, and I'm going to put that in here. So it's going to be the placeholder button. And I also want to do the same thing with my start button. I don't have a start button. I want to take that one, download it. I want to put that inside the same location as well. So I have a couple of buttons now. Reset, start, a couple of other buttons. So some other assets here. And what does it look like? So the placeholder is literally, I just made it here in Fireworks. All this is going to be is if the user does not enter an image for their game object, they're going to use this placeholder image. Just something to come up so they can test their image out, all right? That's all it's going to do. And if I want to create a start button, because the start button I think is pretty useful to start your game, so I just made it here very simply in Fireworks. Okay, so now that we have this, then we can go up in assets and we can see under images, we have several new things. We have the placeholder image. We also have the start button, and there's other things in here. Cool. Last week, we talked about this button class, and we have in the button class a couple of things that we have in here is this event listener that waits for the button to finish loading before I calculate the width. That's what it does, right? But imagine if I have other bitmaps that I want to use. Remember I talked about this game object superclass that I want to make right now. So I have other things I want to use. And what if, I'm just putting it out there, I have a player, I have enemies, and they're going to be very similar to this, right? I mean, I want to get their width and height. I want to set them in the middle. I want to do all kinds of similar stuff that I'm doing here for my button. So why not create a super duper kind of like game object class that the button inherits from, right? So that it's also a bitmap. Now there were some options for us that we could have used. Instead of making everything a bitmap, what we could have done is make everything a display object. Let me explain this for a second. So if I go back out to my easel.js documentation, right? And again, I'm just looking at easel.js. This is the main library we've been using now. And I go to bitmap. You can see the bitmap is inheriting from display object. And not just bitmap, but other things too. Bitmap, as well as our text, right? Our text, which is our label, inherits from display objects. There's also sprites. We can do a sprite, and we'll talk about that. That's also a display object. It's kind of like display object is our root class, if you will, for many, many other objects. However, if I go back to display object, I don't know what type of thing I'm making. Is it a sprite? Is it a bitmap? It's hard to compare. I can certainly do this, but I found when I did this the last time, it added a layer of complexity for you guys that didn't really help you. It just made it more complex. Helped me out because I like, kind of going down to the root. But on the downside, you have to add additional objects that you compose inside of your class to make your class what it is. So I'm just going to inherit from bitmap. That's the decision I'm making to make my game object. Okay, just letting you know why. So here I'm going to make a new object. So right click, make a new file. We're going to call it game object. Remember, this class is going to be something that I inherit from, but it's going to be slightly different. I'm going to make it abstract. So again, module, objects. I'm going to export. What does export do again? Why am I using export? Export means something when I use the export keyword. That's right. So what it does is it exposes, that's the word you should use, exposes the class, whatever I have, to the outside of this this method by using objects dot and whatever the class name is, right? If I don't have export, this class is locked into this module and is inaccessible. Okay, so object, instead of using a class, I'm going to make it abstract. And it's going to inherit from the createjs.bitmap. All right, so question for you guys. What is an abstract class? Why an abstract class? So export class, we need a name for the class, game object, how about that? And but why abstract? Why not just make it a regular class? What's the difference between an abstract class and a regular class? Anybody? Yes?
Abstract class cannot be instantiated.
Good. It cannot be instantiated. In fact, an abstract class is like a blueprint for other classes. That's what it's like. So I want to make this thing because game object is very generic, and I want to make more specific game objects like player, enemy, whatever. And they're going to have their own class that defines what they are. They're different than a game object, right? I'm going to create some basic functions that all game objects should have. That's going to be my game object superclass. But there's going to be some more specific things, specificity, that's going to exist just for those type of game objects. It's going to make them more specialized. So again, just like anything else, I want to talk about private instance members. This is kind of, I'm just outlining right now. Here is some of my constructor. Wait, we forgot our public properties. public properties. And then below the constructor, we're going to have some private methods and some public methods, right? These are the things we're going to have in our class. So let's start with the constructor. In the constructor, I want all of my game objects to have some kind of image string, which is of type string. And the image string, I want to give it a default. I want to say that the default value is /assets/images/placeholder. I just made this thing, placeholder.png. So guess what? If you don't give me something, if you don't give me an image, I'm going to give you an image. Right? That's what I'm doing here. Okay? And then I'm going to go to the next line here. I want to have my x and y coordinates. So my x is going to be a number that I'm going to set by default to 0. My y is going to be a number that I'm going to set by default to 0. And then I want to know is it centered or not. So centered, and it's going to be Boolean. Because I'm making a constructor, I need to call the super constructor because this constructor, this class, inherits from bitmap, the bitmap superclass, right? So I need to call the super constructor, and I need to satisfy its requirements. The only requirement it has is for an image or URL. So I'm going to pass in image string. Okay, that satisfies the super constructor. Okay? Are we good? First things first, make a constructor. Second, instance members. So what do I need for this thing to have that I'm always going to have for every other class, every other game object I make? Well, you know what? I want to keep track of the width, the height, because if I know the width and height, then I can create a rectangle, around them. I create a bounding box. And when we do collision detection, I want to kind of surround my object with some kind of bounding area, a bounding volume, right? So we need width and height. So we'll say that width, which is a number, all right, we need that. And because width is going to be private, then we need an underscore for this, right? And we're also going to have underscore height, which is a number. We're also going to have half height. That's a calculated value. Half the height. I don't want to calculate it more than once. And I also want to have half the width. That's also a number. And I might as well put them in proper order, half width and half height, because that way it's just put in the right order. This can't be a dash, it's an underline. All right, notice that I'm getting the same problems I got last time. I got to define these in my constructor. Let's just set these to 0 here for now. So I can say that this dot underscore half height is equal to 0. That's what the first thing that came up. I don't know why. This dot equals to underscore width. That's equal to 0. This dot underscore height. That's equal to 0. And so these are our initializations. This dot underscore, let's do half height again. And I'll make the other one half width. So half width. There we go. Okay, so I just initialized all these things. It says this dot, it doesn't know what that means. Super must be called before. I can't do this before my super call. All right, so I got to do this first. My super constructor must be called first. And then I'm going to do some initialization. That's what this is. So initialization, right? And again, I could do it out here, but I think it's better over here, right? I also want to have a position. So private underscore position, which is of type vector2. Hey, we just made a vector2. So I want my position to keep track of where I am, right? And again, I want to initialize that here. This dot underscore position is equal to a new vector2 object, which for now is empty. So these are good things, right? I want public properties and getters and setters. We got to do all those things too. Let's do them. So again, I'm going to do all the ones for width and height. Maybe you can race ahead of me and know what I'm going to do. Why don't you try and do things before I do them? So I'm going to say get width, right, is returning a number. And in the width, I'm going to return, just for now, this dot underscore width, and set we'll say new width. Okay, so that's the getter and setter for width. And you know what? We're going to copy paste just to make this a little faster. It's easier to destroy than to build. Right? So just change these around. And this is new height. And we'll change this to height. And this will be new height. Height. Okay, there we go. So now height's done. Okay, half width and half height are calculated values. I want to take the current width, whatever it is, multiply it by 0.5, right? So again, I'm going to have both of these. But now let's think about this. I want to compute my half width and compute my half height. I want to have some private functions to do this for me, computing half width and half height, right? So I want to go into my private methods again. Let's do a private method. So private underscore compute, again, half width and half height, right? So we're going to say compute half width. It's going to return void. Actually, it's going to return number. And half the width is, I want to say, return this dot underscore width. Actually, this dot width. So I'm going to use that thing, right? Multiplied by 0.5. And I'm also going to do the same thing with computing half height. And you're going to say, but why? Why are you doing this, Tom? You'll see. All right, cool. So I've got computing half width and half height. Yes, nicely. And remember what I want to do is, if somehow I change my width and my height, then I want to recompute half width and half height. Right? I want to compute them when I change width and height. When I set width and height, I want to compute half width and half height. That's when I want to do it. So I want to say that this dot half height, right, is equal to this dot, oh, how about half width? Half width is equal to this dot compute half width. Yes?
Why do we need to store the half of the value instead of calculate?
Because I'm going to do it once. If I calculate, imagine I'm going to do it. I'm going to need that half value a bunch of times.
Okay.
Otherwise, I wouldn't store it. If I only need it one time, you're right. Just multiply by 0.5. But I know that I use half width and half height a lot. For example, for radius, I want to calculate the radius of something, and if it's square-ish, I don't have a radius, but I have something that's square. Then I take either the half width or half height, or I take both, and I come up with an average to create a bounding volume, right?
The calculation costly, then take the value.
Yes, because I do it if I do it every frame, which I would do for calculating distances, and you'll see in a second I'm going to need this. I only want that calculation to happen once.
Okay.
So I do it here in the game object, and then what I can do is when I go back, I have that value. I don't have to calculate it anymore, right? It's going to save me cycles, make it more effective. So I'm calculating half width. Again, I did this slightly differently in the first class. And again, this dot underscore half height is equal to this dot underscore compute half height. All right, so I'm computing half width and half height. It's a computed value. And when I set the width and the height, I actually compute half width and half height as an example. And so I never really have to set half width and half height, right? It's more like a getter. So if I want to get, I'm going to make a getter for half width and half height. Get half width, right? Which is going to be a number. It's almost like a read-only value. I shouldn't be able to set half width. Doesn't make sense, right? I should just calculate half width, right? So I'm going to return this dot underscore half width. And the same thing goes with half height. Get half height. Today my typing is not good. And then return this underscore half height. As you can see, it's terrible. Okay. Make sense? Half width, half height. I'm returning him. I'm good. So now I have those values. Now what about position? This is important. So I want to get position and set position for sure. So get position, which is going to return a vector2 object. Return distance underscore position, right? And I also want to set position. Set position. Now we need to do some different things here with set position. I'm going to say that position needs a new position, which is a vector2. But not only am I going to say that this dot underscore position, right, is equal to new position. No, not only just that, but I'm also going to set the x and y coordinates that are attached to this bitmap to the new positional values. I need to do this because it won't track any other way. You can't update the x and y positions. Remember, vector2 and my bitmap have nothing to do with each other. They're two different things, right? And so I have to update my x and y coordinates right here. Whenever I set my position, boom, my x and y coordinates are updated too. All right, so I'm going to say that this dot x is equal to this dot underscore, or I'll just take the new position dot x, and this dot y is equal to new position dot y. Right? I need to do this immediately when I set anything, any kind of position through here. I want to update my x and y coordinates too. Here's my challenge. My vector2, right? If I go back to my vector2 class, right? In my vector2, when I get x and y, I can get x and y. I can also set x and set y, right? And if I set x here, right, sure, it does whatever I need it to do, right? It sets up, you know, this new magnitude, blah, 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 blah. But it has nothing to do with my bitmap. So the danger is, if I set x and y here directly, that's a mistake. I shouldn't be able to set x and y directly, because if I set an x and y directly here, right, then it does, but it doesn't do anything for my game object. It won't set my x and y coordinates because my vector and my bitmap are totally different, right? So they don't do anything to each other, right? I'm using position because I want to start calculating distances. I want to start calculating those kinds of things, right? It's a convenience function more than anything else, because I don't have access to my x and y coordinates. The x and y coordinates are coming from display object, right? And I didn't write that. Someone else wrote it, right? So just letting you know that there's a danger here that my x and y coordinates here for my position have nothing to do with my x and y position on my bitmap. So I could do a couple things. I could make it so that my vector2, it's only read-only, but then I can't do any of this. That means I couldn't do square magnitude, and this would have to be read-only. There are read-only values. So I could say outside of this class, you know, that x and y are read-only, but it doesn't make sense, right? So we're going to have an issue. Other options are, I could pass an optional value into the constructor function of my vector to say that here is the parent value, the parent class. If I don't pass it in, then the parent class is null. And if the parent class is null or undefined, then don't do this. So that's another thing I could do. So here's what I want to do to help us. So I want to say that in my constructor, so my constructor value, so again, in my constructor, I have x and y, and then there'll be something else. It'll be optional, right? The optional value will be like the parent class, if you will, some kind of parent object, right? And it will be a parent object that has x and y, a parent display object. That's what it's going to be, whatever that parent display object is going to be. Let's put that in. And this is new. This is not something I did last time. So it'll be called display object, and it'll be optional, right? And it'll be of type create.js display object. Or I'm also going to accept, you can put the or values in here. I'm also going to accept null, like nothing, right? So null is a value. I can do that, right? So it's either a create.js or null or nothing or any. Call it whatever you want, right? And or is 1, sorry, not nothing. So it's a null value. So if I am null, if it's not null, if it's something else, and I can check for type if my display object is of type something else, and remember I want this to be optional. I want this to be optional somehow. So when I come in here, I want to set it to a value, right? So can we think about a way of doing this so that it is optional? Well, there is a way. And I believe if you put the question mark in front, it becomes optional in TypeScript, right? So again, it's either a display object or null. Again, I don't know what it is, right? But it's one or the other. How does this change things? So, sorry, go back to vector 2. How does this change things? Can I pass in a display object? What does it look like in my constructor? It looks like this. So it's an optional. It's either look at display object null or undefined. I didn't put the undefined in there. I put it in for me. So it's display object. It's called display object. It's either null or undefined. That's what it is, right? If I put this in here just like this, so it's an optional this. And if I go back to my constructor, it's just either a display object or undefined. Okay. Does that make sense? I'm saying that maybe I'll pass in a display object. Maybe. I don't know yet. Maybe. If I pass in a display object, I want to note that I have my display object is going to be accessible up here, right? So I'm going to call this private underscore display object. It's going to be private only, right? So here's my display object. And in my initializer, right, I'm going to check if it exists. So I'm going to say if, and I'll see if this works, type of display object, right, is equal to create.js.displayObject. If that's true, right, and what I want to do is, and it says the condition will always return false since the type string and type of display object have no overlap. I'm trying to make it so that I could say if display object just by itself, like display object like this. And what this is going to mean is if my display object is not undefined, right? So I can maybe say not equal to undefined. If it's not undefined, right? If it's defined as something else, that's another way of doing it. Then I'll say that this dot underscore display object, right, as an example, is equal to display object. Otherwise, it'll just be undefined, right? It doesn't satisfy this problem though. So this display object is of type create.js.displayObject. That's the way I've defined it, but I haven't. Right now it's undefined, right? Hear me out. You'll see what I'm saying here. And I could write an else. I could say else display object is undefined. I could do that, or something else, right? However, it's best if I write this in a ternary operator type, where I can say something like this instead. This dot underscore display object is equal to, in brackets, this part. And if it's true, then I want to say that this is equal to display object. Else, then I'm just going to pass in null. Right? And let's see if that suffices. Null doesn't like. How about just pass in undefined? That's an actual value. That might work. It's not assignable to type display object. Type undefined is not assignable to display object. Okay, how about any? Yeah, that works. Only refers to type, but is being used as a value here. How about just this? And does that work? Display object type. I want to make it so that it is nothing, right? How about just, yeah, that does not going to work. Maybe just an empty object. How about that? Is that going to work? Because that's also of type object, right? I'll be missing the following parameters: display object, alpha, bitmap, blah blah blah. Yes.
Where did you find display object? In the type, in the field question mark, and the same way the parameter is receiving.
Up here?
In the private member.
Sure, here?
If you go to the project member,
Oh, yes, I could probably do that as well. Like here you're talking about. That's a really great idea, actually. That's fantastic. And then we don't have to do this at all. Right? We don't have to, it will satisfy our requirements. So we can just do this then. We can just say if this, then that. So we can say if, go back to what we did before then. So we'll say if this is true, not equal to undefined, then that's what you're talking about, right? Doing this. That is definitely a solution. Yeah. And okay, so why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? It's a guard, right? I'm saying I may pass in a display object here or not. I don't know. Maybe I will. But if I do, and if I set my x and y, then set the display objects x and y to my x and y. Okay? So I set x and y, and then I'm going to go down here. I'm going to say that same guard, the same guard I'm using right here. If this, I'll still say the same thing. Up here in my constructor and my my thing, I can say if my display object. So I'll say that this dot underscore display object is not undefined. Then this dot x, this dot underscore display object dot x, because it has it, because every display object has x and y, is equal to this dot underscore x. Whew. So you understand what I'm doing there? I'm saying that, hey, if I pass in a display object, if you belong to another display object, this vector, right? Then when I update my x value, update that x value too. Update the display object's x value. I'm going to test this in a second. So, yes, and I'll put the same thing on the y. I'll say that then y, well, that's equal to this. Actually, it's the other way around. No, I was right. Yeah, it's this way. So imagine that the display object that I'm talking about is the game object. If I update the game object, and this belongs to a game object, this vector 2, as an example, then it's going to update that x as well. The display object's x, the display object's y, right? And to fix this, I'm going to go into my game object.ts, this one, and when I declare a new position like this down in here, so here's my new position. I'm going to say my initialization, my position is equal to new vector 2. I'm going to pass in 0, 0, and this, which makes a reference to my game object inside my vector. And it's optional, right? I can use it or not use it. Okay, so if I update the vector now, the x coordinate, it updates my vector, my x. It should work, right? Does this make sense? Hopefully this is good. We're going to test this. We're going to test this out. All right, next. Position. The other thing I like to do a lot of times is when we're colliding, I only want to collide once. Colliding happens when we overlap a lot of times, right? I have an object and I'm overlapping with another object, right? As an example, maybe I have two rectangles. They're overlapping. When the two objects overlap, do I want to collide every frame if they're passing over each other, like collision, 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 collision? No, that's wrong. I only want to collide once. I collided. Not colliding. Colliding. Not colliding, right? I want to collide and then not, I don't want to register collisions anymore, just once, right? Most of the time. For example, I have two objects and they're hitting each other, an enemy and a player. If I keep registering a collision every frame, right, then maybe I'm going to make the same sound all the time, like boom, 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 too many times, right? But I only want to make that sound once, boom, right? And then they're not colliding anymore, right? So I need to keep track of that. So I'm going to say private, again, underscore is colliding. It's going to be a Boolean. It's not going to be an optional. It needs to be there. And I'm going to have get is colliding, right? Which is going to return a Boolean. Okay. And I'm also going to set is colliding. I need both those in this case because I want to be able to have control over if it's colliding or not. State Boolean, and then this dot underscore is colliding is equal to state, right? And we can call this actually new state, whatever the new state is, as opposed to just state. Might be a better name. All right, makes sense? So there's new state. But it doesn't satisfy my requirements here, so I might as well just set this up here. So I'll say that this dot underscore is colliding starts off as false, right? I don't want to set up colliding at the beginning, no colliding, right? So I've kind of set these up. I also want to set my x and y coordinates, right? So now let's test it. I'm going to say that this dot position is equal to a new vector 2, right? And I want to set up my x and y coordinates, x and y, right? Whatever those are. So this initialization, and I'm actually going to do it here. I could probably have done it here too. I'm not going to. I'm going to do it here, okay? And I want to do this for a couple of reasons. I want to test the vector so it works properly, and then I'm going to do it again. I'm going to test x and y and see if it updates as well, right? Because then what the hell? This actually will do both. If I do this, then I won't have to do anything else. Now, so the challenge is, here's what I'm doing. So I'm saying when I update the position, then this x and this y gets updated. And do I still have to do this, is my question to you. So if my position gets updated, so my position is equal to new position, right? When this happens, what actually happens is if I go back to my vector 2 object, my vector 2 now equals new stuff. It's just pointing somewhere else to another vector 2, right? It doesn't mean that this is going to happen. I'm never going to do this every single time, right? And I got to be also very careful. I did this without passing in this for the first time, and I should do that. Okay. So I'm passing in this. I'm updating my vector. I'm x and y. I'm updating everything. You know, but however, TypeScript requires me to do these things. Okay. Now, if I went with what you said, right, which is I like that idea, I can make all of these optional. And if I did all those optional, then I wouldn't have to do those initializations, right? Let's leave it for now. Okay. We'll come back and maybe we'll tweak, you know, our classes later. It's not that important. All right, so now that we have position, I want to be able to, I get and set methods. I want some public methods, but these public methods are going to be lifecycle methods from my game object. So they're going to be public abstract. So here are the abstract methods that I want, okay? The first abstract method is going to be called start. It's going to return void. Then we're going to have public abstract update. That's also going to return void. public abstract. We're going to also have a reset method, which also going to return void. And we're also going to have an abstract private method, which is kind of weird. Private abstract. And we'll make it, instead of private, we'll make it protected, because otherwise it won't work. Protected abstract method. It's going to be called underscore checkbounds, which we use a lot for boundaries, boundary check, which returns void. And why? What did I do wrong? Abstract. How about that? Okay. So that makes sense? So that's our class. That is our game object superclass. Okay. So these abstract methods are going to be something that I want in all of my game objects that inherit from this game object, which is my buttons. That's the new thing. The first thing it's going to inherit is my buttons from this thing. All right, cool. So, excellent. What else do I want? What else does my button do? My button does all this. And because my game object is a image, this might be a good idea to do all this work, as opposed to me doing it by myself. Every time, right? So let's just copy this for now. Go back to my game object superclass. And inside my constructor function, after I figured out my position, that's going to be at the end. But I want to figure out, this kind of stuff, right? So if centered is true, centered comes from here, my constructor. If it's centered, then my regx and regy values, I want to do my width and all this stuff is going to be calculated, right? Well, I can't calculate width and height until I have this loaded, but it should be something I calculate. So I'm going to say something like this dot width is going to be this dot getBounds dot width, right? And remember, when I calculate width, I also automatically calculate half width, right? I don't have to calculate that again. And then this dot height is going to be equal to this dot getBounds dot height. So I want those two things to be inside, right? And now I can use this dot half width and this dot half height. There's another reason why I want to use half width and half height, because I do that a lot, calculate those things. And I don't want this to happen here. I just want to do this. Okay. So I definitely want this in here because I don't need this anymore either. Because so this way I wait till my object is loading. Now this causes a few problems. There's some TypeScript things that this causes, because this is another scope. So be careful when we put something in here. This, you have to be very careful what it does, and we'll have to test this out. Okay, so definitely I want this in here because every game object should be or not centered. I don't know. Maybe it's centered, maybe it's not. The other option is, should I keep track of whether it's centered or not? If it's centered, and what if I don't want to make it centered anymore? Should I be able to do that outside of my class? I don't know. For now, no. Maybe in the future, yes. Okay? Didn't work when I tried it before this. How about this? I tried it, didn't work. All right, let's see if this works now. So I can't use my game object yet, right? Because I have to attach it to my index.html. So let's attach it now. So here's my index.html. Vectors first, then game object. Script, source, /scripts, objects. Wow. Game object. Yay. All right, cool. So I've attached it now. Excellent. Just because I've attached it, I can't use it. Because remember, it's an abstract superclass. I have to make another class from it. So first, let's put it up on GitHub. So again, going to go to GitHub. Going to add all this stuff. These are all the things I added, right? Add these in. Add all those things in. There we go. I want to say added game object, right? That's what I added. So push. So all that gets added. So now I have my vector, and now I have my game object. Right? Game object's up. However, we need to test it. Let's make a new class. And let's get rid of all this for now. So we have button. Well, let's use the button class. The button itself will be my test, right? So here's my button. And I want to inherit from, instead of inheriting from create just bitmap now, let's extend game objects. Okay? Well, I got some problems, right? I mean, first of all, image path is not enough, right? Image path is not enough. It's okay. It says expected 4 arguments, but I got 1. Uh-oh. Let's go back to my game object, that superclass. Did I make these optional? Well, I kind of did, but I did it here, here, and here, but my Boolean I didn't. Unless I do this, so I say by default, all of my game objects, are they centered or not? I'm going to say that no, they're not. By default, they're not centered. Okay? I have to turn it on for it to be centered, right? It's not centered. All right, going back then. It satisfies requirements now. This image path satisfies requirements because my super constructor only needs 1. This is good. So image path is enough. Here's my image path, right? It's passing this in. X and Y coordinates, I could pass those in too. Why not? So let's pass in X, let's pass in Y, and let's pass it centered or not. Let's pass in that. That's important, which is centered. Okay, so all those things get passed into my super constructor. I don't need the load add event listener. All this stuff is happening already for me in my game object superclass. I'm doing this already. So all this stuff, gone. Right? I don't need to do that anymore. I need this because this is button specific. This has nothing to do with my game object, but it's giving me a little bit of an error. It says, hey, you're trying to implement this inherited abstract member, this class, but you haven't inherited all this stuff. So there's something called a quick fix. And if I click onto it, it actually says, let's implement it. And it does all this work for me, which is awesome. That did all that typing for me. I don't have to type all that stuff. So let's grab all this stuff, put it in the right place. It should go down here. And let's do it so that I split this off. So these are public again. Public methods. I'll also put a section there for protected or private methods. Okay. So that's this. Okay. I don't want to throw any errors right now, so I'm just going to get rid of all those things. You don't have to. Actually, it's a nice type guard to say, hey, this method is not implemented. If you try and call start, there's no start, right? But I just like taking these away, making them empty. I'm going to call my start function, because my start function is for initialization. That's what I'm going to use it for. So this function is used for initialization, right? That's what my start method is. And I'm going to call it from my constructor. So here in my constructor, I'm going to call start. And I'm going to do that every time I make a new class that's inheriting from game object. Cool. So now my button is a game object. Is a game object, right? And I don't have anything in start, and there's nothing in update or reset because my button right now doesn't need it, right? But in the future, other objects, other game objects might have stuff in there, which I'll show you. All right, cool. So if I did everything right, then if I go back to my game, I should see my button. Yeah, here it is. Yay! Right? And you can tell because if I go back to my game.ts, here's my game.ts, and if I scroll down, here's my label. What happened to my label though? My label disappeared. Label, hey label. What happened to label? It's gone. Right? Let's see if I get any errors. Inspect. They are white. Yeah, so I got to change these from white to black, let's say. Let's make them black, so 0, 0, 0, 0. Okay, that's my object.label, right? And yes, here's my hello world. Instead of saying hello world, we'll say welcome, or the game. How we'll make it the game. We'll make it like 80 pixels, right? And we'll also make it so that it doesn't start at 320 and 240 in the middle of the screen, but somewhere higher up, let's say something around, I don't know, 180. There we are, like this. The game, right? And this won't be at 550 and 430. This start button, instead of the click me button, I'll use the start button. Because we have a start button, I put it inside my stuff there. And instead of 550, we'll do 320 by 430, somewhere at the bottom of my screen. Like so. Okay, so that's what it looks like now. Still works. Everything works great. There's nothing for it to work, but it does work. That means my class, the way my game object superclass, totally works, guys. Here's the test. Here's the test. I want to move my start button somewhere else by the x-axis, like this. This is the test, guys. Ready? Start button dot position dot x is equal to 100. Right? Does this work? Does it work? If it doesn't work, that little trick I did with the vector, that worked okay, right? Makes me happy because that means there's less mistakes. That's what it's going to mean. But so if my user, you or me, we forget and we use position.x, or if I use .x, or if I use position, it all does the same thing. I'm not going to go, wait, I changed the x, but it's not updating. Well, of course it's not going to update. The vector's not connected, right? All right, so so this works nicely. We know that the button works. Let's make another game object really quickly because I want to do some simple collision detection for your stuff. So let's make a new object. We'll call this player. Let player be of type objects. Whoa, wait, I don't have a player object. Let's make a player. Okay, so player, let's make a new game object. Right click, new file. We'll call this player. All right, remember, just like before, module objects. I want to export a new class called player that inherits from game object. Okay, and before I go anywhere else, I can click on player. It tells me to quick fix implementation, does all this stuff for me, nice and quick. And let's put all of our pseudocode in place. So private instance members, right? Public properties, maybe, right? Definitely a constructor. Maybe some private methods, maybe some public methods, right? All these things I need to put in place. And I can take this protected stuff, this part, cut it, put it inside of my private methods, take away this part. So now I have checkbounds. And the same thing goes with these functions. I have everything I need, right, to get going with my game object, which is a beautiful thing, right? Because these are the things that make my game object unique. Things I change in here: start, update, reset, and checkbounds. And of course, I'm going to use my constructor function. And let's suppose do anything with my constructor. So I just call super. Is that good enough? Yeah, it is. Remember, I'm going to get that default thing that I loaded before, right? My default, it's going to say placeholder, right? My embed, and I also want to call my my start function. So this dot starts. Okay, good, we're done. We've got a class, and it doesn't do much. It's a 0, 0. All right. But we can't use it yet. We have to go back to my index.html and underneath my game object, but anywhere else down here, it doesn't matter because it's not related to label or button. It doesn't matter, right? It's going to be a source script / scripts objects, and then it's going to be player, right? Now that I have it linked here in my index.html, I'm going to go back to my game.ts and I'm going to make a new one. So now let player be of new type objects, dot player, there we go, right? And then down here in my main, I'm going to say that, let's put it after the start button. I'm going to say player is equal to new objects dot player, and then stage dot add child player. And if I did this, and if I go back to my my thing, I should see my player object somewhere if I don't have an error. Let's see if I do have an error or why I'm not getting anything. So what did I do wrong?
It doesn't have an image
Well,
to represent the object.
but I did, right?
Yeah, do that for
So I did it. So this should do it. This player should do it because if I go back to definition and if I go to here, then my super constructor says, hey, I maybe need an image string, right? But okay, go to definition and it goes to here and it says, hey, if you don't get a string, go to assets, images, placeholder.png. First of all, does that exist? Assets, images, placeholder.png. This. So I am giving it something, but not working. Why is this? Why is this not working? Because of this. So this causes issues, right? And to know this happening, I'm just going to put a little console log in here. So again, go back to that console log we had. Console.log, image loaded. And now we're going to see that it's going to happen a couple of times. Console. And I got 2 image loaded, right? 2 times. Oh, there it is. I don't know why it didn't appear last time, but now it does for some reason. So that's what the placeholder image looks like. It's like just a placeholder, and it's going to go on the top left corner of the screen because I didn't put any coordinates, right? So, okay, cool. I don't need this anymore. Maybe I just didn't save the file. And you can see it's going to come back. What I want to do now is whenever my player moves, so when my player moves, so that means in updates, in my player update, I want to say that I want to change the X and Y coordinates of my player according to where my mouse button is. Where my mouse goes, my player goes. So I can say that this dot position, right, is equal to a new vector2 object, right, which is going to take an X and Y coordinate of this dot stage dot mouse X. Mouse X means go to the stage, take a look at the mouse. Wherever the mouse X position is, pass it in here. This dot stage dot mouse Y. So my mouse X and Y coordinates are going to be transferred to my position. But this will never happen until I call the update function. And from now on, I'm going to call the update function for all my game objects. So if I go back to my game.ts, then inside of my update function of my game, which is here, I can call player.update, which is this one. Update. There we go. And if I save this and go back, then I should be able to see this. Right? However, notice that it's the top left corner of my screen, and I want it to be in the center somehow. It also overlaps. One thing to note is because I drew my placeholder after my button, it's going on top. This uses the painter's algorithm that I may have talked about last week. Remember the painter's algorithm, how it works? If you don't know what the painter's algorithm, imagine if I'm a painter, like I said before, right? And I'm painting a background. Then I paint a house on top of the background. Then I paint some kind of flower in front of the house, right? Great. But if I did it the other way around, first I paint the flower, then I paint the house. The flower's gone. In real life, I'm talking about. Paint the house over the flower, flower's gone, right? And if I paint the background over the house is gone too. I painted over it. Painter's algorithm. So I got to paint in the right order. And the right order is background first, then something in front of it, and then something in front of that, and something in front of that. Layer order is really important when you draw stuff. And the way it works here in Create.js is when you add child, that's the layer order. So this is the back welcome label. This is on top of the welcome label, and this is on top of the button. That's how it goes. This is 0, 1, 2 in terms of layer order. Okay? That's important to note. Okay. I ran into the same problem as I did last class because there's so many things I had to show you guys, right? So I want to do a very simple collision detection. So there's 2 types of collision detections that are very common. One is rectangle overlap, or what it's called is axis aligned bounding box, or AABB. Axis aligned bounding box. So if I look up the axis aligned bounding box, if I go kind of look it up online, hey, what is an axis aligned bounding box? So AABB collision detection. What is that? And if I look it up, right? And this is the MDN, Mozilla Network. Axis alignment bounding box uses something that looks like this. I have two rectangles, right? And I have a location, X and Y. So that this is the top, this represents the top left corner of the rectangles, or the start, rectangle start. And this is the width and the height. Then I can do this kind of thing where I say, if I take my first rectangle's X coordinate, which is the starting X coordinate, and if it's less than the rectangle's 2 starting X coordinate plus its width, that means they're starting to overlap. Each of these conditions must be true in order for me to have a collision detection. This is axis aligned bounding box. All I need is this code right here, right, for me to make it work. Okay, I'm going to copy this, but my challenge here is, what is my bounding box as an example? What is it for I want to collide my little thing with my start button. My start button is centered, right? I have to count back X and then up to the top. And I got to do that every single time. It'd be really nice if I knew the top left vertex. The top left vertex of every object that I have, right? And I need to do this in real time. I don't want to calculate this stuff here, ever. I want to know the top left vertex. Even if my thing is centered. If the top left vertex is 0, 0, then that's the top left vertex. If it's centered, then I have to count back and up to get my top left vertex. Does that make sense? And it has to be updated in real time. Every time my position changes, I have to update my top left vertex somehow.
That's
Or,
for each object.
what was that?
All objects.
For all objects. Or I just calculate it when I need it. So, I think calculating it when I need it is okay, right? But the way it is, it would look like this in the game. If in the game I wanted to calculate the top left vertex, and I want to do this on update, okay? So I'm going to give this a little bit of space. I want to say, I want to know what the top left of my player is. Top left of my player. So I'm going to say let top left player be equal to the player dot position, right? And my top left player, let's make this a vector for a second, just for a second. So I'll say it's a new objects dot vector 2, and I'll pass in my X coordinate for my player dot position dot X, and let's for now go player dot position dot Y. It's not true, okay? I gotta start at X. Remember, if my player, in this case, this is true, because my player, top left player, is not, it's not centered, so this is okay, right? That's the top left. But for example, for my button, let top left for my button, that's not true. Objects.vector2, my button, which is the start button, dot position dot X, I'm going to subtract half the width. Start button dot half width. See? Half width. I did it again, right? And then on the y-axis, I'm just going to put it on the other line here so you can see it. I'm going to say that on the y-axis that I'm going to take my start button dot y, and I'm going to minus half height. Minus start button. By the way, not y. Position dot y. I'm going to starting to get used to that. And then minus start button dot half height. There. So this is the top left of those two things. Whew. Now I can go back in here, grab this little collision detection code, and fill in the blanks. Right? And it would suit me for next week to come up with a collision class, some kind of collision manager class, or something like that. So I don't have to do this every time, because I can do this. Imagine if I had to do like 4 more objects. That's like way too long, right? And I want to check to see if it's centered. If it's centered, then I would do something like this. If it's not centered, then I would do something like this. Right? It depends if it's centered or not. What if I have one object centered, the other object not centered? Then my collision is going to be off. Right? So rect 1, that's top left player. Right? So that's this part. And let's just fill in anytime it says top left player or rect 1, let's just go in and replace with top left player. Right? And this will be just player dot height. Right? Player dot height, and this is player dot width. Right? This is the top left values. And then this is top left button. Top left button, right? This is top left button. This is top left button. This is top left button. And now we have this one, which is just start button dot width and start button dot height. So what this is saying is if it overlaps, this is the AABB collision check. AABB collision detection, right? So AABB is axis aligned bounding box. These two boxes that are axis aligned, they're on the same, their axes are in the same orientation. They're not like this. They're not this way, right? They're like this, okay? They're axis aligned bounding box. Then I have a collision. Then console.log collision. Okay, so that is this type of collision detection. And if I was to try this out, this happens every update. All this stuff happens every update. Guys, I could put this into a nice little function in a collision manager class. And then I can check two different objects, object 1 and object 2, which I'm going to do next week. All right. And if I was doing this, then if I go back to here, to my code, right? And let's just see it. So I'm going to go into inspect. I know I'm running overtime, guys. Please bear with me, as I always do. And if I go here, then you can see that as I'm overlapping, I see a collision, right? When I'm not overlapping, no collision, okay? That's how it works. So I'm checking between the box, this one, and this one, see? Nice? Okay, but, I don't always want to collide. Remember I said I only want to collide once. So I have that thing where I can say that if my start button is already colliding with my player, then I don't want it to show a collision. I only want to collide with my player once. So I can say only register a collision if, right, my start button is already not colliding. If start button, right, dot is colliding, right, it's not is colliding. If it's not colliding, right? Oh, did I spell this wrong? Go to definition. Darn it. Let's just rename this thing. So refactor, rename. I want to catch it now. Refactor. Is there a rename? Rename symbol. Rename symbol is colliding. Sorry, guys. I can't stand when it's spelled incorrectly. That'd be very bad. And they'll mess up everything else that happens. Yay. Nice. So if it's not colliding, then I want to say it's collision. And I want to say that start button now is colliding is true, right? However, if this isn't true, then start button dot is colliding is false, right? So there we go. There's a check to see if it's colliding, and if this doesn't work, if this whole thing fails, then it's not colliding, right? So we can set it to false, and this will toggle the colliding on and off. And if I did that and go back, then you can see that it only collides. Well, that's not cool. It always collides, like forever. That's not good. Is colliding is true, is colliding is false. If the start button is colliding, if not start button is colliding, is collision. And then start button is colliding is true. Okay, cool. So then it won't come back here. So why does it come back? That is weird. Yes.
I'll try to put the condition is colliding before the,
You can't, because then what's going to happen is how are you going to set it to not colliding again?
because the first time it will be false, right?
Yeah, but then it's going to be false here too, right? If this is not colliding, if start button is colliding, is false, which it would be, right? Because we've set it to false too, then this is going to be false. And if you want to show, if I want to show you that, I can say that if I comment this out as an example, then it's only going to do this once. Actually, yeah, it's never going to collide again. If this works, then it's never going to collide again. Let's try this. So, but it doesn't work, see? Because it's going to collide forever. And so what happens is it comes in here and then it ignores this. This is like not is colliding. It's always false, right? So let's make it so that it is. So when I set it to true, this means that is colliding is true now, right? And we can pick it up again. We can say console log just to test it. Start button. Actually, instead of doing a console log, let's do a little bit of a test. Guys, give me 1 more second. I want to come down here and do a breakpoint, right? You can do a breakpoint. The way breakpoints work in VS Code is if I click this little bug, right, it's going to say, hey, do you want to debug, really? Chrome? I'm going to say, yes, I do. I want to debug. And it's going to create a debug configuration for whatever I want. I want it for Chrome, right? Which creates this, but I know that I'm running a light server on port 3000, so I'll change that to port 3000. And then if I go back and debug by pressing this little button up here, then what it's going to do is going to bring a new window up, and as soon as it comes down, it's going to come down to this. Like any other debugger, for example, in VS Code, Visual Studio, I mean. So now that I've done this, I can inspect the objects. For example, what is this? Look. Even when I set it to true, right, start button somehow is false, right? I can actually inspect what start button is, and it says colliding is false, even though it should say it's true, right? So somehow this didn't work. My is colliding didn't work somehow. This part.
You save it.
Well, that means that I'm not, it's my setter is not working. So if I go to definition, sorry, if I go to definition for this thing, right, you can say it's got, this is colliding, right, this is getting, and here's the setter, new state, this is colliding as new state. I want to put a breakpoint up here in my game object. So let's take it away from here. And I want to go into my game object now and put a breakpoint. So there's my breakpoint. My game object is colliding. I want to put a breakpoint right here. So it comes in here, and I want to see what my new state is. So breakpoint right here. And then let's run it. Let's debug it again. So debug. It's going to stop. And then I can inspect what these things, what these values are. Look, it comes as false. Comes in as false, right? So it's false. Is colliding. Set is colliding. I'm setting it to false. All right. Okay. And let's continue. Let's see what happens when I continue. Failed to load resource. Or let's just continue going. So I want to continue, stage update, and then I come back out. So somewhere, instead of it being loaded to true, it's being loaded to false, because now I'm getting all this stuff. I don't want this stuff. This is like the back-end code, which I don't care about seeing. Right? That's what this part is. So I'm back to this. Look, I'm back to this again. Okay, now I come back to the state. It says false again. It's setting it to false again. Second time around. Okay? And then I want to zoom out. Right? I'm back in the stage. So it came back around. So it came back if this is true, and then I set it to false. Right? And it's going to keep setting it to false. Keep setting it to false. Keep setting it to false. That's the problem. It's always going to be false. And if it's always going to be false, this is always going to be true.
That's the model over there.
Yeah. Does that make sense? No, it's always going to be false. Doesn't matter what I do, if it's always going to be false. Always going to be false.
Okay, but go to
Chrome, okay.
But
Yeah.
Right now it's false.
Yeah, but it's going to be false no matter what happens. If I go here and I move this button over here, it's going to be false no matter what. That's what I'm saying. And let me explain this to you for a second. So here, let's stop debugging. It makes sense because I'm saying this. I'm saying in my game.ts. So if I go back to game.ts, what I'm saying is, hey, check to see if not start button is colliding, then do this. And then I'm setting it to false. Every single time I'm setting it to false when I go away and come back. So if I took this away, then it would only do it once. So I will do a toggle block comment to show you this. So I go back and I run it. And if I go to console, it should only work once. But now I can't do it again. Look, see how it works once. So how do I go false again? This is working the way I want it to work, right? But how do I not collide anymore, right? It's working exactly how I want it to work now, right? So only once, right? So even if, look how accurate it is. It's pretty good, right? Look. Well, why was this blocking it? And how this goes true, but when does it get set to false? Somewhere, this is being set to false somewhere, because otherwise, if not start button is colliding, right? So where, oh where, is this being set to false? Somewhere it's being set to false. That's what I'm trying to tell you. Somewhere else. Otherwise this would never come back here. If this is a problem, we're going to find some other time, not now. Because this is temporary anyway. So this is one type of collision detection. The other type of collision detection is circle detection. I want to show you that one too. And then we're good to go for today. All right? Next week, by the way, for your first playable build, one thing that was asked of you is to put it up on live. It's not going to be a thing for next week because I wasn't able to get to it this week. All right, so you know where it says it must be up on a live site on GitHub pages or whatever. I'm not going to request that from you next week because we didn't have a chance to cover it, right? I just couldn't get to it because of all this. So yeah, so the other type is squared radius check. So this is squared radius check. So the way square radius check works is the same thing. I can say that if I have the center of my circle, the two centers, so let's talk about that. So I'll say the radii. So let radii, well that equals my, let's say I'll take the width of my, it's not going to be accurate, but I can take the width of my, maybe I'll take the height of my button and the height of my the half height of my my player, and if they overlap, that's the radius. Okay, so radius is equal to player dot half height, right? Plus the button start button dot half height, right? And then I can say if vector2, so objects dot vector2 dot squared distance of p1, which is my player dot position, and my, in this case, my start button dot position, if that the distance is less than the radii squared, right? Radii squared, then we have a collision if this is not true. Okay? So this is square distance. Now it looks a lot easier, but it's more computationally expensive in some ways and not as accurate. Let me explain. So let's just comment this part out. So this is one type. And this is the other type. So now if I try this, right? So you can see now that I'm colliding, right? But what about over here? Nope. Nope. Right? And actually that's kind of how I thought it would work. It only collides once, right? So what actually my guard kind of worked for this, but somehow didn't work for this.
Okay, so maybe you have to change to false. So like,
Oh no, this is true. It's just this part, right? So else,
so again,
yeah, else, yeah, I gotta try this out. Else that start button is colliding is false, but that means that you know, I'm gonna have the same problems as before. So this is what I really want to do, and if I save this and continue, then we should go into console, and then I should be able to do 1, 1. See, like this. See, so this will work. But look at the side. Let's see how inaccurate it is. I have to come much closer because my radius. There's no radius for the button that'll work. The button's wide but short, so it's kind of weird. The radius would be too big, right? It's not great. And so for this case, in this case, a rectangle check, which is AABB, is a better performance for collision detection than radius. If I had circular objects, it's kind of a circular ship or a planet or something, then circle detection is more accurate because then you have these edges on the box that are useless. Huh?
bullet.
Yeah, bullets. Yeah, bullets. However, you may have a check, and we don't have this. I'm not going to do it now. I may have a situation where I need to do something that's circular with something that's square. Circle ABB check combination, or a line with a rectangle, or line with a circle. For example, for platforming, or I need to do a point inside of a circle. And there's many other types of collision detection checks. And the other thing is, this only checks for axis aligned. What about if it's some other polygon, like a hexagon, right? Hexagon won't work properly. Hexagon with, let's say, a circle. Then I have to use a different collision detection method. And I'm gonna give you some of this stuff next week. I'm gonna put together a little library for you, so you don't have to think about it. That's just the math part, right? That you don't need to do. So for next week, I need you to be able to move your guy around, some kind of movement. This is basic in terms of this. Now you notice I have my top left corner here. Yours could be centered if you want. I didn't even pass in an image. It's just using my placeholder just for testing, right? You can also explore keyboard input if you want, although it's not required for next week. I just want to see what your thing is going to look like, a very high-level prototype of what your background looks like, some kind of simpler interactions with collision detection, where you can show that, well, I would collide here. It's almost like a really high-level prototype, right? Can you make something go on the screen, that kind of looks like your game? Can you move something around? Move your player around. Show me what it would look like in real life. That's all I want you to do for next week, okay? It doesn't have to work. Everything can be placeholder assets. Maybe hopefully better than placeholder, okay? That's all I want for next week. Any questions around the stuff I talked? I know I talked about a lot of stuff, and for those people watching this video again, or people watching it for the first time, thank you. I'm going to, again, make a collision manager class next week, and we'll talk about more stuff. There's lots more to come. And there's, like you can see, that we're building on all the technology that we're kind of putting into it now. It keeps building on itself until we have more of a complete mini game engine that we're going to be building by the end. Okay? Remember that your slot machine is due in week 6. Next week is week 5. You should already start thinking about getting assets for your slot machine, buttons, the background for your slot machine. That's also due. Assignment 1 is due in 2 weeks. And then you have your midterm in 3 weeks. Okay, so all these things are coming fast and furious, and you need to know how to use this stuff. The best way to learn how to use this stuff, train yourself by doing your assignment number 1. And then if you do assignment number 1, then your midterm test will be much easier than if you didn't do it. Okay? Any questions before we go? Guys, thank you so much for sticking around the extra time. I appreciate it. See you next week.